Welcome back to another episode of Us Anxious Folk. My name is Lauren, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking about how to talk about your anxiety, how to share those parts of yourself that feel really scary to share, really vulnerable, really terrifying. You might wonder if it's entirely necessary to open up about your anxiety to people around you. And while it's certainly not something you have to do, I really believe that it tends to make things a lot easier. In my experience, being open about your anxiety not only helps to decrease and soothe the anxiety that you feel on a day-to-day basis, but it also has the potential to soothe and decrease someone else's anxiety. It can help to connect us more deeply to one another. It can lead to opportunities and pathways that we otherwise may not have stumbled across. And I think most importantly, it really leaves the world in a better state than it would be if everyone was silent about the really human sort of despair that they go through. It means a world where people can be their true selves. They can be authentic and real and open and honest, and they feel like they have the space to do that. And I think that leads to people actually being happier and the world being a more colourful place. So in a nutshell, I do really think that it's important to talk about the things that we go through, to be open about having experienced toilet anxiety or OCD or psychosis or depression or panic or, whatever it is that you've been through, for all of those reasons that I mentioned. But then we're left with the question of, how do we do that? How do we start to be open about the things that we don't even want to feel? How do we present ourselves as someone who has an anxiety disorder in an environment where we feel like it might cost us something to show up fully, such as in the workplace or in a new relationship? As someone who has spent the last decade slowly opening myself up layer by layer to those around me, I know how hard it can be to be real about what you've been through. And I feel like I've navigated these conversations in enough of a variety of settings to have some thoughts on how to go about it. So let's get into it. Let's talk about talking about our anxiety. So one of the things that strikes me most about anxiety and having a conversation with someone about our anxiety is that a lot of the hesitation we feel about talking about it is not even like so much a conscious thing. I think it's more to do with the nature of our anxiety. So when you think about anxiety in general, like the anxiety response itself, you think of how it is essentially hesitation. It's that feeling on your skin where you suddenly become aware that something might be wrong, something might be about to happen, there may be danger nearby, and you need to be alert to it. You need to be on guard. It's like there's a threat somewhere and I need to quiet down. I need to focus on these feelings. I need to be ultra sensitive to what's happening so that I can't really interact as much as I usually would in like a calm and responsive sort of manner. So it makes a lot of sense that we hesitate when it comes to talking about these feelings of hesitation. And then for those of us who have been through years of anxiety, years of panic, years of experiencing sensations in our body and alarming thoughts alongside those sensations, we've often spent so much time being not only confused by those sensations, but feeling like flattened in some ways. Like feeling that when the anxiety comes on, it's often meant that things get hard, things get scary, things get dark. We go to the places that we would rather not ever have gone, mentally speaking. And so to have an innate openness to discussing that, of course we aren't going to have that. Of course our initial reaction to bearing these parts of ourselves is going to be one of like No way. No fucking way am I talking about that. No way am I giving it the potential to come out into the open again and possibly flatten me. And like I said, that might not even be a conscious thing. It's just that we've spent such a huge amount of time and energy on trying to look beyond our anxiety and panic that our natural instinct is to turn the other way from it. But even though this is exactly why it is by nature hard for us to talk about our anxiety / depression / mental health, replace those words with whatever works for you, it's also exactly why it helps to lighten the mental load of it all and the emotional weight too. Just like how staying in a panicky situation helps us to learn that the panic eventually eases and we realize that we aren't powerless in that situation. When we talk about the things that we are most afraid of, we learn that we can talk about these things and that actually when we do, we find a sense of lightness, a sense of connection, almost a fondness for those parts of ourselves. So all that time that we spent trying not to talk about what we were going through for fear of it diminishing our sense of self, we end up finding that the opposite is true. That it increases our self-esteem, it makes us feel like we have our own back, we feel supported by ourselves rather than abandoned by ourselves. So I think that's probably step one for opening up about your anxiety, is knowing that just because you feel hesitation about talking about it, it's not necessarily a sign that you shouldn't talk about it. It's just the nature of anxiety. It's the habit of how we've learned to approach our anxiety. And that even if it feels terrifying to do so, it's often one of the most helpful ways to reconnect ourselves and to soothe our relationship with our anxiety. We get there by talking about it, by discussing it, by opening ourselves to it verbally, not just in our minds. The next step in guiding yourself towards talking about your anxiety openly is really understanding that being open about what you've experienced is not going to turn people away from you, but actually it's going to pull people towards you. Of course, there is a caveat here in that the people who are pulled towards you will be your people, and the people who do end up getting turned away are not going to be your people. And that's fine. The older I get, the more I'm learning that not everyone needs to like you. And if you twist yourself in order to please someone else's ideal of you, it's going to hurt you in the long run. And it's going to be for nothing in the end anyway. Because if they never were your people, no matter how you twist it, they're never going to be your people. You know what I mean? So don't worry about potentially losing people if you're open about your mental health. Because I promise that they aren't the people that you're supposed to have around you anyway. What you need to remember is that you being open about what you've been through is almost a magnet for someone else to be open. When someone is real and genuine, it's such a relief. It's like, oh my God, I can finally be myself with this person. Like I can fling off that like perfect human suit that I try and wear and I can just be me. And I personally am always appreciative when someone comes forward and is really themselves. In those occasions, I don't even realize that that's what I was waiting for. Like I wasn't even aware that I was waiting for permission from someone else to be who I am. But when it happens, I'm like, oh my God, like, thank you. Thank you for being brave, because now I can be a little bit more myself as well. And that has been the most beautiful thing for me personally about making videos on YouTube and talking about anxiety incessantly on Instagram, because I still get messages from people who say, like, I just found your toilet anxiety video and I felt so relieved. I felt so seen and heard. And, when I filmed that video, I was terrified. Like, I was genuinely grouped with fear about what my boyfriend would think about me and what people who knew me from school would think about me. Like, even though I was so many years out of high school by that stage, I was still like, but what will the people from high school think? Which is just bizarre, really. I have to say, like, even though it seems like I did something brave by being open about toilet anxiety, and it was for sure something brave that I'm really proud of, I still titrated it, you know, like I still edited it and censored some of the things that I was going to say. And I tried to paint myself in a way that I was like bearing myself a bit, but not as honestly as I could or should have, because back then it was not something that I was used to doing. But even from that, like even just showing an inch of my toilet anxiety in a public forum, people were like, thank God. Thank you for talking about this. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being a human being and for letting me feel a little more okay with my humanness. So you need to actively remind yourself that even though bearing these parts of yourself feels scary and seems like it's going to be something that repels people, you know, it's like tripping in public. It's like, oh God, that's going to be so humiliating. People will laugh at me. I'll be embarrassed. It's actually a shake-up that we don't realize that we all need. You know, like we're desperately waiting for it. We're all walking around wanting to be these best versions of ourselves, not just like to prove something to those around us, but for ourselves. Like we want to see ourselves in a good light. This is something that we all do, but this is how we get there in a way that is real. This is how we become our best self, by showing up completely rather than in titrated fragments. And if you don't do it for you, do it for the people that you love. Do it for the other human beings that you know are in pain, the other people in this world that feel like they're drowning and think that they're alone. Remind yourself that when you open up about what you feel, someone else is drawn to open up about that too. It's like a garden of humans that all start blooming, you know, like we're all looking at each other going like, who's going to do it first? And then someone finally does and we're like, yes. And we all just like open ourselves up and it's amazing. But there are times when it is particularly difficult to be real about these things, and possibly none more so than when you're navigating the dating world or the workplace. These are two arenas in which bearing your soul can be both frowned upon and really incredibly vulnerable for so many reasons. And while in the dating world we do tend to open up eventually about our mental health, you know, especially if dating leads to a relationship, like sooner or later, your mental health is going to come up. In the work environment, we can exist on this like superficial level for years, like never telling anyone about our anxiety or our, you know, colorful mental backgrounds. I will say that I've been on both sides of the fence in terms of work. My mental health is not something that I've spoken about in like job interviews, for example, unless it's relevant to the job itself in some way. And I did go through a stage early on in my, you know, anxiety journey where I wouldn't come to work because of panic, and I would say it was because I was sick. Like I was afraid to approach the conversation from a mental health perspective because it just seemed more acceptable if I said it was a physical health thing, you know, like I have a physical illness. Seemed like that was like understandable and excusable, whereas saying I'm panicking was not, you know. But I have come a long way since then, and I've also had times where I've been completely open with my managers about my mental health, about being, you know, too panicked to come into work. And for the most part, I was met with unending support and a lot of space to be a human being as well as an employee. Most companies these days offer mental health support in some form. A lot of companies have an employee assistance program these days, which is great. And I think especially since the pandemic, a lot of companies are like far more open to the mental health conversation than they once were, which is awesome. But again, that's something that's only going to progress with time. The more we are willing to contribute to the conversation. We can't have an environment that is open about mental health unless we are willing to be open about mental health. And sometimes that's going to go down well, and sometimes it's not going to go down well, but we have to continue the conversation if we want it to be a conversation that we're able to have. You know what I mean? So that's another reason to talk about what you're going through in an honest and real way. Conversations in the workplace may look different than a conversation in a social setting, but that's obviously something you would need to use your best judgment on depending on your own work environment. So something to keep in mind, but I think the key step in talking about your anxiety/mental health in the workplace is to remember that you are valuable not just for your ability to do a job, but your ability to contribute to that job in a meaningful way. And that is made meaningful by like the person that you are. That's made meaningful by the experiences that you've had and the perspective that you have and what you've been through and the things that have like created who you are today. No one is exactly like you, and no one is going to do the job in exactly the same way you would do it or bring to the job exactly what you can bring to it. And that's tied into your value as an employee. You aren't losing that by being honest about the challenges that you might have faced. If anything, you are strengthening that. So just keep that in mind when you're approaching the mental health conversation within the workplace. The fact that you're human is not a shortcoming at work. It's genuinely a strength. But I guess you just have to approach it in a way that is progressive and open rather than in a way that is defensive, if that makes sense. The way I've kind of approached it in my workplace is the times when my anxiety's been debilitating for me, I've been open about that. I've been honest about that. And sometimes that conversation was quite hard to have. Sometimes it made me feel like I was being stripped bare. Sometimes, a manager wouldn't respond in maybe the most helpful way. Like I remember telling a manager one day that I felt like I was going to go crazy. I was having quite a disassociated sort of episode, and I said to her, like, I'm scared I'm going to do something crazy. And she was like, you won't. And then she's like, you won't, will you? Like she had to check. And like her hesitation made me go like, oh, fuck. But, that was her doing the best she could. Maybe that was a conversation she'd not navigated before. And maybe the next time she has that conversation with someone, if she does, she'll, have a better way of approaching it. In opening up ourselves as human beings, we have to anticipate that the person we're interacting with is a human being too, and they might not always respond in the best way or in the most helpful way. But the best thing we can do is at least keep the conversation open, keep that line of discussion open so that there is at least the opportunity to respond in a helpful way. It's the workplace is like, I guess, a difficult thing to talk about because again, it does depend on your workplace in particular. But I have to say I've had like varied jobs over the years, and so I have approached this conversation, with a lot of different people. Some workplaces are a lot more open to it and a lot more focused on your well-being. Some other workplaces aren't as focused on your well-being as an employee. One day they will be because they need to be, but it's a slow going thing, and it's something that I think is improving. But again, with repeating myself, it's because we need to keep up the conversation. So maybe be a trailblazer in that sense. in terms of dating, it's a tricky conversation to, bear yourself mentally and emotionally speaking. I know someone contacted me recently about talking about toilet anxiety within the dating realm and being terrified of doing so. And I totally get that, because it is something that is tied in with a lot of shame, like in terms of toilet anxiety specifically. I know, in the past with me, with dating and talking about agoraphobia, like that was something that I felt a lot of shame with, because it was like, how can I present myself as this like exciting, lovable, dateable individual when, it's like, what did you do for the last couple of years? Spent them stuck inside my house because I was scared of leaving. Like it doesn't really, when you think about it, you're like, this doesn't make me seem attractive or appealing. But what I've learned in all of that is that even though it's hard to be open about this stuff, you are ultimately creating a channel for a better, stronger, deeper connection. And who doesn't want that in dating? Like every single time I inevitably came out and spoke about my mental health challenges with someone I was dating, I was met with such support, such beautiful responses. Like, we genuinely forget that we aren't the only ones who go through hard stuff. And again, I think that's the nature of anxiety. Like there's so much shame and hesitation and avoidance tied up in there that we think talking about it is going to reveal too much, going to reveal too much of ourselves, or it's going to leave us open for more pain and suffering. Anxiety by design makes you utterly focused on what's happening to you in order to protect you. So of course you forget that the other person you're interacting with has more than likely been through some shit too. And even if they can't directly relate to, say, panic or OCD or whatever your personal flavor of mental health challenges is, they will be able to relate to the idea of suffering. They will be able to relate to the idea of pain, of hardship, of struggle, because we have all been through something, or we are all on our way to going through something. Every single one of us. Just because someone hasn't yet experienced a panic attack, it doesn't mean they aren't going to experience a panic attack later down the track. And then if they do, they'll be like, I totally understand what you were talking about with panic. Like that shit is scary. Like no one's going to leave this world having not experienced some kind of extreme difficulty. It's just the nature of being human. And I can sort of see how that can seem depressing in a lot of ways. It's like, oh, we're all here to suffer and to hurt. But I think it actually speaks to how amazing it all is. Like, it's a miracle that we are here. It's a miracle that we are born, that we grow, that we get to exist. And even though we all experience horrendous stuff, some more than others, like some people experience some unimaginable horrors. Some people experience a shit ton of grief. Some people experience, a lot of physical pain, some mental pain. Like it varies, but we all experience some kind of significant pain. We are all here at the end of the day being these miracles. And that's not like a religious thing. That's a fact. Especially if you are somebody who has, seen a baby being born or birthed a baby, you'll know that's crazy shit. How we can grow these little human beings and then they grow. So yeah, we're all like ultimately these little miracles running through life, trying our best to get through. And these struggles that we go through will shape us in ways that will ultimately lead to something beautiful. We become more compassionate. We become more understanding. We create art, we write stories, we write music, we express our pain in the most magical, breathtaking ways, and that leads to love. That leads to connection. It leads to beauty. It leads to this like exquisite human experience that is equal to the miracle of us being here in the first place. But it all starts with us being open. It starts with you talking about what you've been through in whatever format makes the most sense for you. So I hope that this episode has inspired you to talk about your anxiety. I would love to know more about your experience in talking about your anxiety. What was it like for you? What happened afterwards? Or if you haven't spoken about it, how do you think you might approach it? Let me know in the comments of this episode on YouTube, or you can message me on the gram. Yeah, I know I haven't been as present on there lately as I have been in the past. I've spoken about the reasons for that, but basically it's just the whole life thing, working, mothering, all of that. I'm trying. I do want to quickly share a story that happened to me recently, which actually is what led to the inspiration for this episode. I was working with someone new a few weeks ago. I'd been working with her for a few days, and we just sort of had like surface kind of discussions. Anyway, at one point, someone walked past who was carrying a book, and she said to me, not the girl carrying the book, the girl I was working with said, oh my gosh, don't you just love when you see someone walking past with a book? Like, you just know like they're a reader as well, like they're a bookworm too. And I was like, oh, I love books. Yeah, I love reading. And then I don't often just throw this casually into conversation, but sometimes I do because it's fun. But I was like, I've actually written a book that's going to be published soon. And she was like, what? What do you mean you've written a book? Like, tell me more. And I'm like, yeah, I wrote a book about like mental health. And she said, what inspired that? And I said, well, I've really struggled with anxiety a lot. I've really struggled with, panic and depression and mental health. And so I wrote a book all about that. And she was like, she's like, really? She goes, I've struggled with that too. She said, I actually spent a few years of my life unable to leave my house. I had a condition, it's called, and I'm like, agoraphobia. She goes, yes. I'm like, I had that too. I said, that's a lot of what the book is about. I spent years housebound. She said, I didn't leave my house for years. I had panic attacks. She goes, I still have them. I still struggle to get places. She's like, wow, I can't believe this. And so we, from there, developed this really close connection. And I just, we were already friendly at work with each other, but now it just feels like I can really be myself around her. And I'm so grateful that that conversation happened, because it led to her being open about what she's been through, which led to me being more open about what I've been through. And it created this beautiful connection. And it also reminded me that when I think I am this weirdo, this like strange, anxious person floating through the world, I meet these people who I'm like, oh, that person's awesome. Like, I really like them. And then I discovered that they are just like me, that we have a lot in common. And yeah, it always reminds me how beautiful a place the world is, and how there is never really anything bad that comes from being open about our struggles, that actually we connect and we really truly see each other. And it's an amazing thing. Anyway, that's my story time. I hope you all enjoyed this episode. I hope you're all having a beautiful day. And I will see you in the next episode. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Us Anxious Folk podcast, the podcast for the chronically overwhelmed, perpetually panicked, anxious folk in all of us. If you would like to find more about me, you can find me on YouTube at Lauren Rose or on Instagram at Lauren R_Rose.